Energy insecurity is the inability to adequately meet household energy needs. So that means you're unable to pay for quality and accessible energy. And then energy democracy is energy systems where ratepayers can both influence and decide the energy they use. Illinois, like many other states around the country, has a deregulated energy market that allows ratepayers to choose their electricity suppliers. These are called alternative retail energy suppliers, but it also allows folks to enroll in community solar farms. And then energy equity or energy justice, both of which are generally interchangeable, is the ongoing process of reducing the disproportionate energy burden rates by race, class, and property ownership. And so there's kind of three large elements of energy justice. First is recognition. You all are doing this right now, recognizing that energy access is unfortunately inequitable. And that it's not a quality clean energy is difficult to attain. And then procedural is involving community members and groups in the decision-making process. So ratepayers can influence the energy system to be the most accessible, clean, and affordable. So this is, knowledge and access to the options that are out there that many people do not realize. And then distributional, that's what Solstice does, is bringing the resources and opportunities that and making those equally distributed, specifically with community solar as an affordable and clean energy option. And so here's a graph I found that really kind of highlights how disproportionate the energy burden is right now. African American, Latino, and low income households have a disproportionately higher medium energy burden than white and non-low income households. So low income households have an energy burden that is 3 times higher than non-low income households. And the difference between households by race is actually higher than that of the building's ownership, whether that be rented or owned. So it's a little small, but you could kind of see to the right of that graph, the medium energy burden percentage by those different categories. And you see at the very top that it's almost twice as high for low income households than non-low income households. And then you could see below in that second orange box how different the household by race is for those energy burdens. And then this is a phrase that's that came up and was very elucidating of the dilemmas people face in when they have a higher energy burden, is heat or eat. Households with higher energy burdens may have to make choices between necessities, including home heating and cooling, food, healthcare, childcare, transportation costs, and even housing, which in some severe cases can lead to homelessness. So currently, nationally, 1 out of 5 US households had reduced or abstained from these necessities to pay an energy bill. And another example of how this is so disproportionate and based on race is 28% of African American households reported having waived food and or medicine monthly in order to pay for energy. And then this is an organization that does a lot of great research on energy burdens. So we're going to watch this video if you could play it.
Millions of Americans have lost jobs in the COVID-19 recession. As family budgets are strained, energy bills remain a major challenge for millions of families. My name is Ariel Drehobel, and I'm the lead author of ACEE's new report on household energy burdens, which measure the percentage of income spent on energy bills. When we crunched the numbers, we found that even before the pandemic, a quarter of US households had a high energy burden. That means that a quarter of households in the US spend more than 6% of their income on their energy bills. That's more than twice what the average household spends. This is even more stark for low income families, where 2/3 of them had a high energy burden. Every way we look at the data, we found inequality. For example, we found that Black households spend 43% more of their income on their energy bills as compared to white households. And Hispanic households spend 20% more, and Native American households spend 45% more. According to federal data, many of the same communities that experience high energy burdens due to systemic policies and historic underinvestment are now being hit hardest by job losses and the impacts of the recession. There's a lot that we can do to reduce energy costs and these disparities. Many people with high energy burdens live in inefficient housing with older appliances, bad insulation, or old heating and cooling equipment that waste a lot of energy. We estimate that weatherizing a home can reduce the energy burden for the average low-income family by about 25%. Yet many low-income households aren't afforded access to the upfront capital needed to invest in energy efficiency improvements. That's where the federal, state, and local governments and utilities can come in. In order to improve energy affordability and reduce unequal burdens, they need to boost funding for energy efficiency work and ensure that these investments reach communities who experience the disproportionate impacts of high energy burdens. As we work through this pandemic and recession, we need to look for equitable, long-term solutions to improving energy affordability. Low-income housing retrofits, energy efficiency, and weatherization move us in the right direction.
So that was just a quick summary of some of what Connor had already talked about, but just to give you a better understanding of energy burden and looking at those numbers for the whole nation. But then I wanted to zoom in and specifically look at Chicago, since Chicago Hopes for Kids is in Chicago. And when we see this, it's the same disproportionate burden in Chicago. So while 20% of households in Chicago experience a high energy burden, 37% of Black households in Chicago experience a high energy burden, which means that Black families in Chicago are spending more of their income on energy than families of other races or ethnicities. And so looking back on Connor's slides, this means that they have to make choices between things like energy or food or energy or school supplies and that sort of thing. Also in Chicago, a quarter of low-income households have an energy burden above 15%. This is 5.5 times higher than the median energy burden on households. So this means a large percentage of their household income is going straight to energy costs. So how does this connect to homelessness? There's not always one cause that leads to homelessness. It's often a buildup of varying factors, and unjust energy burden is one of those potential factors, especially when we see a major overlap in the population that's experiencing homelessness and the populations that face energy burden, which shows that there's clearly a larger systemic issue here. So as we already saw, Black communities face a higher energy burden than white communities. And when we look at homelessness and we look at those rates and numbers, so for example, if we look at students in Chicago facing homelessness, 98.2% of students experiencing homelessness identified by Chicago Public Schools are children of color, and 81% of those students are Black. So this is they're interconnected issues. And, when we look at why this is, it often comes down to these unjust social factors, which include disinvestment in South and West Side communities, lack of green spaces and trees in these communities, and also disproportionately high energy burdens, which lead to environmentally dangerous living conditions. And if you're interested in learning more about the ways that this plays out in Chicago, Cooked: Survival by Zip Code is a really interesting documentary about a deadly heat wave in Chicago in 1995. And it shows the ways that our city, Chicago, has systematically created these unsafe and unjust living conditions in specific communities.
And so how does community solar fit in within all of this? There were a few examples of some great ways of reducing energy burdens, including upgrading, inefficient appliances, weatherization of buildings, all of which are things that would significantly reduce energy burden within BIPOC and low-income communities. But community solar is currently one of the cheapest forms of electricity in the country. And generally, it is upper income folks who are able to afford rooftop solar. And so to make sure that low income and BIPOC communities aren't continually left out of this clean energy transition, community solar is essential to reducing, another essential element of reducing the energy burden. So community solar in general, what is it? It's an off-site solar farm that someone can subscribe to. They basically subscribe to a piece of the farm, and the farm produces credits that then show up on their ComEd bill and reduce the electricity supply costs of their bill by 20%. There's no cost to join. There's no cost to cancel if you choose to. If you're moving somewhere else, you could cancel at any time. All we need to know is be given a 90-day notice. And there's nothing on your property. You don't have to change your meter. You don't have to install anything. Whether you rent or own, it doesn't matter. And that's what makes this really accessible to participate in the clean energy transition. Currently, there's 4 farms. They're all in Whiteside County. And we're currently enrolling from. And with this partnership with Hopes, when you do enroll and sign up, we then donate $200 to Hopes. So then we're actively then supporting the fight against homelessness as well. And so I calculated out from that graph that we saw earlier, the impact community solar has on reducing an energy burden by each of those categories. And on average, it's a 2% reduction in energy burden with a $340 reduction in annual costs. And while that may seem like small, it has a disproportionate impact on low income folks who that does make a difference. And so, yeah, as I mentioned, Solstice and Hopes are partnering together to spread the benefits of clean energy and community solar, and raise $2,000 for their summer enrichment programs. Sign up really does only take 10 minutes. All you need is your most recent ComEd bill. If you have any questions, you could talk with our customer success team, and they'll be able to walk you through the entire process. And then immediately on signing up, which will automatically, or within 90 days, that is, begin to reduce your electricity supply costs by 20%, we'll immediately donate $200 to Hopes.
Thank you all for joining. And again, this is the URL. We'll also be sending a follow-up email after. Thank you guys so much. And yeah, hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Hill.